Welcome to Monday, the third day of February 2025. Welcome to a new week, and it is another forecast here where it depends on where you are. You could be in a place where it's windy, it's warm, and all the snow's melted away. You can be in another place where it's snowing right now and very, very cold. And this is how the week's going to go. You're going to split most of the western United States on a line that goes east and west. North of that line, it's very wintry. South of that line, it's very spring-like. And where you are, north or south of that line, will dictate how things are going to go because we have a very strong Pacific influence. Those very strong Pacific jet stream winds we showed you last week just pushing a tremendous amount of Pacific moisture into parts of the western United States, but also Pacific air. And if you're in that Pacific air, you're warm, you're downsloping, you're Chinooking, you're warm and windy. But there's an Arctic push that's coming out of Canada that's coming into the far northwest parts of the Pacific Northwest, the northern plains and the northern Rockies. So you're going to get snow and cold in those areas today and off and on throughout the entire week. The pattern, the jet stream is kind of stuck for about 5 days here. So north, cold and snowy. South, warm and windy. Now, as little waves come through the jet stream flow, we'll continue to see waves of snow hitting the mountains of the northern Rockies and the Pacific Northwest and parts of northern California, while well above average temperatures will be found south of that boundary through probably about Friday. After Friday, we're going to see a shift. The pattern gets unstuck, so to speak. Then things get very interesting again across really all of the nation as we get into next weekend. Starting next weekend, the pattern shifts, gets unstuck, and the cold that's been locked up north will begin to head south. That could then set into motion another potential push of very cold air across the nation. I don't know if it'll be as intense as what we had in January, but it could be extensive, and it will again be helped by another stratospheric warming event. And if you get a stratospheric warming event that coincides with a push of Arctic air coming in, that tends to amplify the cold. So you could be, for the next 5 days, very spring-like. You could be very winter-like. All depends on where you are. Now, we had some high wispy clouds here on Friday across western Nebraska before things began to change. And before the clouds moved in, a great shot of the moon and Venus. Then a lot of just very heavy looking lenticulars, that Pacific moisture very deep, coming on in. Got a great one there over the Heart Mountain area. The Heart Mountain area now getting impacted by the Arctic push coming out of Montana. And you're going to see a band of snow going across the northern parts of Wyoming and all across Montana again today. There's a shot out of northwest Colorado near the Craig area. The satellite loop this morning showing the atmospheric river coming on in from the west coast. Plumes of Pacific moisture and waves just continue to come on go from the west coast into the Pacific Northwest. If you look at the movement of the clouds, you can kind of see where the boundary is right here. The blue up here represents the colder temperatures and the low clouds. The further, that's how far southern extent the cold air has gotten. Then you see the high pressure ridge and the very mild air on this side of the line. So basically, here's your line. North of this line, much colder. South of this line, windy and much warmer. If you're on that line, you're going to get a little bit of both. And one thing we will see at the start of this week, if you're out here, temperatures are going to bounce up and down a little bit as some of the cold will leak in. But these very intense jet stream winds just act like a barrier, not allowing the southern push of the cold air. It's going to lock it up for now. And the satellite image looking at the water vapor really showing you that deep moisture arcing its way on through. You're not going to get precipitation south of this line until you get cold air at the surface. The upper level moisture stays in the higher reaches, can't really condense or convert itself into precipitation other than over the mountains. You can see this long east to west stretch of winter weather from the northern Great Lakes through the northern plains into western South Dakota, far northern western Wyoming. So you can kind of just see what's going on here, where the trajectory of the cold in the Pacific meet across the whole lower 48, but flooding the zone of mild Pacific air across the rest of the nation. And this is going to be how it locks into place. Strong wind event. Strong winds continue along I-80 and I-25. When you take a look at the temperature anomaly as of early this morning, you can really see the contrast. There's the Arctic air, a big area of it right here, but you can see how much the Pacific is driving warm air across the rest of the nation. Does this mean winter's over? No, you just have a very strong Pacific jet stream developing and really taking control, and it will here for the next 4 to 5 days. If we were to zoom in a little bit more, look at the contrast right here, butt up against the North Platte River Valley. You had snow turn to rain in Jackson yesterday in the western valleys of Wyoming because you got a big plume of Pacific air coming in. But if you're in far northern Wyoming, Montana, the western Dakotas, you're in the Arctic air. So there's a big contrast in temperature. As of about midnight last night, it was 55 in Cheyenne, 57 in Denver, 14 in Sheridan. So you can see right along where that boundary is. And it's stuck into place. Sub-zero temperatures up here, 50s and 60s down here. And there's the 500 millibar flow. You can see the strong west-east flow all across the nation. So the Pacific air just floods in. This will be where we're going to be over the next couple of days. Look where we are at noon today. At noon today, around 60 in Cheyenne, barely above zero in Sheridan. You can see along and west of the divide, the Pacific air comes through east of the mountains. We do see some leakage later today of the cold air. So out here, you are going to feel some of the cold briefly before it warms up again. So you can see those temperatures by Tuesday morning. The cold air gets further south, all the way to the Palmer Divide, 15 degrees below zero up here and well below zero up there. But the cold air only temporarily comes in east of the divide. It will retreat again by midweek. By Wednesday, there's a little disturbance that will break off the main flow and get pushed eastward. This will cause a band of snow to form. Between now and Tuesday, though, you can see where the snow and the precipitation will fall. This is through tomorrow morning. This is the additional snow that's going to be falling today through tomorrow morning. Then that little wave on Wednesday gets pushed through. This will cause more wind on the plains, more wind along I-25 and Interstate 80. It will bring another wave of snow to the mountains, another wave of snow to southern Canada, northern Montana, northern North Dakota. Pacific air dominates down here. That's what the snowfall looks like with that wave coming through on Wednesday. As we get into Friday and the weekend, things begin to get unstuck. This high pressure ridge begins to rebuild and pushes more north, which causes the flow aloft to come north-south now. And what that starts to do is it starts to bring the weather and starts to move things. So the west to east flow, which is so dominant, becomes more cross latitude, which means we start to see more flow from the north to the south. So what that will do is this unsticks things. So late in the week, this really gets started on Friday and into the weekend and into Valentine's week, it's a different ball game. The west to east dominant flow buckles. So you get a change in latitude flow with the weather pattern. Then what you can see happen by Friday, the Arctic air is across the northern tier. It's basically, it's at a standstill, kind of locked into motion. But by Saturday, the cold air begins to leak south. Notice the cold begins to move into Utah, the western slope of Colorado, moves into the Great Basin. So there's a shift now. Things start to change. Precipitation comes in with that push over the weekend and early next week. So you're going to see a more southward push of the precipitation now as the colder air works its way south. As we get into early next week, we are going to see that high build and get stronger over Alaska. And then we start to see that tail. Remember, we talked about the tail with these Arctic outbreaks. This happened in January. You get a little tail that comes through that draws the Arctic air further west into Western Canada. And if the high pressure ridge builds, then you get the flow that comes in from the north and south. And what'll happen, if this all comes together, is the pattern that's holding up the Arctic air goes away. And the Arctic air has free reign to come back into the western United States. And you can see by next Monday, a week from today, we're starting to see the temperature anomaly really change across the nation and get much colder again. The question will be is the extent of the cold air, how deep it gets, and how long it lasts. But look, it's like January, it goes coast to coast. So we just have to see. So a week from today, the pattern we're in will have been broken. Breaks by this weekend. But for this week, if you're south of that line I drew, you're going to be thinking it's spring, thinking winter's over. If you're north of that line, you're thinking, well, winter is back, and it's kind of going to be hanging around for a while. Look at the temperature anomaly by next Tuesday. So you can see the colder air gets deeper, comes along the continental divide there and spills southward and gets all the way to the Gulf Coast again. Not saying it's going to snow on the Gulf Coast again, but this could be another extensive and significant push of Arctic air. And it has support in the upper levels, just like the January event where the stratosphere warms up right over on top of where the coldest air is going to be here. So when you have stratospheric support like this, you're confident that this Arctic push next week will come together. It's just how much it will come together, how intense it will be, and how much of the nation it will cover and how far south it will go. So this week it's the Pacific versus the Arctic. Next week it's the Arctic winning out. Have yourself a good Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.